Welcome to Lookup Week. This is video 2 for Lookup Week. Yesterday we did 24 examples of VLOOKUP. Today we're going to do 23 examples of the lookup function. Now you can download this workbook, VLOOKUP Shark Week Video 2 Lookup Function, by clicking on the link below the video. Also, since this is a very long video, if you click on the Show More button link below the video, there'll be a table of contents with minute hyperlinks, and so you can jump to whichever section you want. Now let's go over here to the sheet V or H. Now lookup, so we'll say equals lookup. Lookup function actually has two possibilities. One is you can do a lookup value and have a lookup vector and a result vector. So the table that you're looking stuff up, the lookup vector is going to have the value you want to match, and this will have the values you want to return to the cell. They can be separate, right? Or you can use this version, lookup value, and then your array. Now the cool thing about this bottom one is you can do horizontal or vertical lookup. So you can do VLOOKUP or HLOOKUP. Now lookup was around before VLOOKUP and HLOOKUP. In fact, the story goes that Bricklin and Frankston wanted to do their taxes, so they had to do a lookup table. But they knew that some people did vertical, some people did horizontal. So this is a vertical because the values that we're looking up are in the first column. This is horizontal. The values would be in the first row. Now, important about lookup, it only does approximate match. Now, you can force it to do an exact match if you sort the first column, but that's not always possible. Now, the way you determine whether lookup does vertical or horizontal, if there are more rows, more or equal to rows than there are columns. So here you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There's more rows than there are columns, so it's going to do vertical. Over here, we'll see that there are more columns than rows, and so it will do horizontal. If the table is exactly the same, then it does vertical. All right, so let's see how to do this. I'm going to use this one right here. I'm saying look up that, comma, and now look the array down here. I'm simply going to highlight this table. It'll know that it's going to do vertical lookup because there's more rows. Not only that, but the lookup doesn't require a column index number like VLOOKUP. It'll always go from the last column, or in this case down here, row. So that's it. Enter. And so it got the 10% right there. It's not formatted. So if I type 6,000, it better be 12%. 7,589, it better be 12%. Just like the VLOOKUP, if you put a value that's less than, so if I put -1, it's going to give an NA. If you put a value that's bigger than the last value, it will, of course, take the last value. Just like VLOOKUP, the categories, the way the approximate match works is it, as a metaphor, it races down here, and when it bumps into the first value that's bigger, so if I type 2,000, or bumps into the first value that's bigger, it hits C6000 and jumps back a row. That's literally a metaphor for how it works. It doesn't actually exactly do that. And if it has the last value again, then it just races through. It finds nothing bigger than it, so it settles on the last row. Let's do HLOOKUP with the lookup function. So I'm going to say lookup that, comma, and then this table has more columns, so it'll know to do HLOOKUP. And so it gets 1650,000. So if I change this to 2,485, they'll both get vertical, horizontal, they'll get the correct value. Now, no problem, you can do exact match, but you have to make sure that your column is sorted. So this is sorted. And then I'm going to do one that's not, and it doesn't work. So equals lookup. The lookup value I'm going to look up. And I'm going to do the array down here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So of course it'll do vertical lookup. And it's looking up this. It finds the 49, and sure enough, it's looking up the phone number. So we'll try it on the unsorted table here. Whoops, I'm sorry. We're going to take that number right there, look it up, and we'll take the array here. So not this first column is not sorted. What they've decided to do is sort by last name. So we're looking up this number right here, and we should be getting that telephone number, and we are not. So if you don't sort it, then you're not going to be able to do an exact match. All right, now another great use. Most lookup tables, right, are orientated like this. We have the first lookup column, and then there's some subsequent columns. But we would like, the lookup will allow us, and I didn't mean to have this here. The lookup will allow us to have lookup vector and result vector, so they can actually be separate. And we'll see a bunch of examples later on. But let's look at a great example here. And we saw this in the first lookup video yesterday, where we did VLOOKUP to retrieve records. But here we're going to use a lookup and use two different vectors. So let's go ahead and look this value up, and I'm going to hit the F4 key to lock it. So when I move it this way, it's locked on that. Comma, the lookup vector, well, this sorted column, F4, and then comma, the result vector. Now what's happening here is once you use lookup vector and result vector, lookup vector is no longer, like array, going to return anything. It's going to determine the position, and in our case, the row. So this 50 number will return 3. So this lookup vector, in conjunction with the lookup value, is now establishing the row. And then comma, the result vector. Well, I'm just going to highlight relative cell references. Notice as I copy this way, it'll then, the dancing else will move to first, email, and phone. And again, this is just our first example of using this amazing lookup vector and result vector. Lookup vector determines the position. This has the values to bring back to the cell, and whatever position here, it'll return the thing from that range, the result vector. All right, so Catherine, so it's got the right information there. Let's do, just to show you, we did two examples earlier with lookup. We did horizontal and vertical when either the rows were much bigger than the columns, or the columns were much bigger than the row. Let's do one that's exactly the same, right? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, just to show to ourselves. So I'm going to look up this. There's our lookup value, comma, within the array. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. It's going to do vertical. So if I change this right here to 1,500, it better give me the, oh, sorry, how about 2,500? Better give me the 5%. If I go down to 250, it better give me 0. All right, so that's just what happens when the rows and columns are the same. Now let's go over to the sheet L adding and see how lookup can beat VLOOKUP adding. Now we already saw this example, but VLOOKUP does approximate no problem. So let's look at how VLOOKUP would work. I'm going to say, hey, I'm going to look up that sales value, comma, within this table, F4, comma, and then I have to tell it the column index. Now we can just leave that fourth argument off because this is approximate match. Right? So we add up all those. We Alt equals and add all those up. So we get 780. I kind of like lookup sometimes. I like lookup here because all I have to do is do what? Enter two arguments. F4. Typing a comma, 3 or 2 or whatever you need there is no big deal. But lookup, I have 2 less characters I have to enter. So I kind of like that. All right, so what did we do here? We did either one of these. We got all of the commissions. So for each one of these sales rep, we had our sales. We were looking up our approximate match here and returning the bonus amount. Okay. Now what if you didn't want this extra column? All you wanted is the actual total. Let's scroll down here. So no extra column. You just want to do it here. No problem. we can use the lookup. Now, the lookup value, we actually want to look up all of these. What we're going to do here is lookup adding. And actually, a nice way to think about this is once you have this, notice that as I copy this down, enter F2, the blue one is in essence forming a column. So as I go down all the way, if you have that situation and you want a single cell formula, you can just slap the whole column into the first argument of lookup. So I'm going to slap all these right there. Comma, the lookup vector. Well, this is in essence all of the criteria for looking something up. The lookup vector, instead of just one single lookup value, we gave it a bunch, but the two columns are still here. And I could easily use this if I wanted, but I'm going to use this, right? Because it'll know that there are more rows, so it's doing vertical lookup. And since there's a second column, it'll know to return the thing from there. Now, what does this do? When you give it a bunch of lookup values, it's going to return a bunch of values. F9 to evaluate that. And we can clearly see either one of these formulas up here, we get the same array returned to our formula. I'm going to Control Z. Now, we could use sum and Control Shift Enter, but all we need is sum product. Sum product, like the lookup, is one of the few functions built inside of Excel that can handle arrays without Control Shift Enter. Anytime you have and I'm going to hit F9 again to emphasize this, we're returning a bunch of values. That's an array. Arrays usually don't sit in a single cell, so you have to put them in, either enter them inside of a sum function, Control Shift Enter, or in this case, we just put it in sum product, which can handle array. You can see the name of that argument. And we'll see in just a moment that lookup also has the capability of handling arrays. Now notice, you might say, well, isn't this an array? Yes, we're putting an array into that argument, but that argument is expecting a single value. So we have to put it inside of some other function that will add them all. Later, we'll see this lookup vector. That's the one that, like sum product, can handle arrays without the keyboard shortcut Control Shift Enter. So there we get the same answer. Let's look at another variation on that. Here we want to, in essence, do lookup adding with criteria. So here we did all of them. But here we want to do the same thing, but just for Joe. Now let's just go get it, see what we mean here. If we did this whole extra column like we did here, we could do a sum if, right? The criteria would be here, Joe, or Joe, and then this would be our column to get the values from. So in essence, we could do sum if equals sum if we had this other column here. So I'm going to say that. So for sum if, that's the range with all the criteria. The criteria is Joe, and the sum range is over here. But we want to avoid, we want to see how to do it without this extra column. Actually, let me hit F4, F4, F4. No total. So if I Alt equals, I better get the 780. Yeah. So in essence, we're going to be doing the same thing here, except for on this range, we're going to add some criteria. So I'm going to say equals lookup. And I do want all of these values, but I want to isolate them. I just want some of them, just the Joes, right? I'm going to hit the F4 because I'm going to copy this down. I'm going to say times in parentheses anytime Joe relative cell reference is equal to, and then F4. What this will do, this gives us trues and falses. If I hit the F9 key, the action operation of multiplying will convert them to ones and zeros. So there will be 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, only the few ones multiplied by that. F9 will give me just the actual sales values that we're looking up commissions for Joe. Control Z. So again, we have an array inside the lookup value. So there's multiple criteria, comma, and when we say lookup vector, first column, second column. We'll return the values from the second column. And it will be a bunch, right? F9. The commissions bonus, the bonus commission for Joe, and we want to add them all, so we simply put it inside of sum product. And we should get the same answers without F4. F4. We should get the same answers without having that extra column. Alt equals. All right, so a couple lookup adding and a lookup adding with criteria. Now, again, we did arrays here, so they return multiple values. But now we're going to see the lookup vector, how we can put arrays there and have the lookup deliver a single value to a cell and avoid Ctrl Shift Enter. All right, here we have two criteria. We're going to see two examples of what lookup can do. It can handle an array. It also can do lookup left. So really, I have a two criteria lookup. I need to look up Seattle QFC. So it's like three things in one. We're doing when we have two lookup values. So these are our two lookup values. We're going to have an array in our formula, and we're looking up left because we want to return something to the left. VLOOKUP only can return something either from the first column, second, or third. It can't go to the left. All right, so equals lookup. The lookup value. Now, I'm going to skip over that comma because we're going to create our array here and look and see what the array returns, and then we'll think of a good lookup value. Oh, yeah, two criteria, so I'm going to say that, and I'm going to join it with the ampersand. So now two criteria become one, F9. Control Z. You could also put a little character between there if you want. We're not going to get in trouble, so I'm not going to do that now. And I'm going to say anytime that's equal to, and I'm going to join that column, and then Shift 7 is the ampersand, the join symbol, and that one. Anytime you join two columns like that, it goes from two columns, F9, to 1. That semicolon means go down to the next row. So now we have a single column of values to check from 2. Control Z. Now, that right here is going to give me trues and falses, so I'm going to hit F9, Control Z. And I want only ones where the trues are, so I'm going to say 1 divided by, and then force the ampersands and equal sign to calculate before that division. So now I have F9, 1s and divide by 0. So in this case, oh yeah, we're only ever going to get 1 because there are no duplicates in this case. We'll see an example in a couple ahead where we get more than 1 and how we deal with that. Control Z. So I'm just looking up 1. There are no duplicates, so I'm just going to say lookup 1. The lookup function, this is an array. Usually you need Control Shift Enter, but no problem. That argument can handle it. Not only that, but the lookup will ignore the divide by zeros and simply get the 1. Now we use our second return vector. And there we go. Enter, and so it returns Mo. Now if I change Seattle and the client FM, it better return Joe. If I change it to DM, there's an NA, so we probably want to amend that formula. But we want to find the sales rep for DMQFC, it's Chip. Of course, you could do something like if error in 2007 and 10 or later, comma, and then something like no match. Right, and so then when we pick something like this, there's no match. In earlier versions, you have to go equals if is NA. That's a true false logical formula. You put this inside of the is NA. Whenever it is an NA, it delivers a true, comma. So what is the value you want if it's true? Probably something like no match or whatever text string you want in double quotes. Otherwise, and then paste that formula again. So now we have All right, so got a bunch of good examples here. 2 criteria when you have 2 lookup values, an array inside of lookup, and looking up left. Now let's go look at this next sheet. There's a bunch of looking up the last thing in a list that we want to look at. Now the first thing is we want to look at, OK, so the first thing we want to do is look up the last number. And we're going to use the lookup function. Now lookup, what's happening here? The way approximate match works for numbers, or even for sorted text, if we give it something bigger than is ever going to be in this column, it's always going to go to the last one. So the biggest number that Excel can see is 9 point, and then I'm going to count 14 times. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. E plus 307 to tell Excel, hey, that's the biggest number. Now you can put whatever big number you want there, but that one, you'll never get in trouble because you can't have a number bigger than that. That's it. That's how you look up the last number. Some big number, and it'll find that too. Right? If I delete this, it delivers 52. Control Z. Now look up the last word in essence. We're going to see 2 different ways to do this. If you don't, I have a formula that's delivering a blank, and this one will find that one. But however, most of the time when you're looking up the last word, you don't have formulas that are delivering a blank. So this is a great one. And I'll remove this, and we'll see that it actually works just fine. Hey, we're going to use the lookup. Now remember, over here we used the biggest number. So now we're going to use the biggest word that Excel can see. Now lookup, the largest number of characters that a lookup value can have is 255, right? So I'm going to be sneaky here. Repeat. I'm going to use the repeat function, and I'm going to say what text? Well, how about the last letter? I'm going to repeat it 255 times. Now I'll show you a little example to show that that in fact is the biggest lookup value that lookup can have in just a moment. But that in essence is our parallel to the big number. This is the big word, comma, and then I'm simply going to highlight this. Oh, look at that. It's returning that last one. Now let's change this to 6, just to show you that 256 Z's can fit in a cell easily, but lookup won't handle it. That's the most characters lookup can have in its lookup array. Now, what happens if I delete this? Because right now it's returning that. Now it finally has it. Remember, this was a formula delivering a blank. So I'm going to leave that there like that. Often, you remember, the point is most of the times you don't have those formulas. But I'm going to leave it there in case you download this. Now, what do you do if that's the case? No problem. We'll switch it up. Equals lookup. And I'm going to skip over the lookup value and think about the lookup vector. We don't want that double quote, which is actually a null text string or empty, right? We want anytime there's one character or more. So I'm going to use in the lookup vector, I'm going to create an array using the search function. The text to find is question mark. As it says up here, question mark is the wildcard for a single character. Comma. Search, what does search do? Search looks through text string and tells you the position of an item. So this is always going to return a 1, right, if it finds any text. But watch this. I'm going to create an array. Within text is expecting a single cell. I'm going to give it a bunch of cells. So it'll return an array of either ones or errors. So let's just see this. F9. And there it is. So we have a bunch of ones. Now we saw just a moment ago when we didn't have any duplicates, we got only one 1. But what are we interested in here? We're interested in the last one here. The lookup will ignore those value errors. So I'm going to give it, Control Z, a 2. Right? That's the idea of the big number that goes then and finds the last one. So that's the lookup vector, is that little search bit, comma, and the result will be this. Okay, so now it's returning 2011. Now notice I have that blank there, so that's the formula to avoid formula blanks. Finally, what if you want to find the last anything? Equals lookup. I'll skip over the lookup value. We'll come back to that. The lookup vector, I'm just going to create an array of trues and falses. I'm going to say anything, anytime anything in that range is not, and not is less than, greater than, double quote. Double quote is technically a null text string, but it will also find the last non-empty cell here. That is going to give us trues and falses. We want to convert it to ones and zeros. So I'm going to do 1 divided by. That means F9, I got a bunch of 1s. And again, I want to get to the last one. There it is right there. Control Z. So I'm going to put my big 2. Wow, 2 is very big. Comma, and then our result vector. So equals double quote. Oh, not. That one's not tricked by it because it's not either this null text string or empty. I'm going to actually add a yellow there. All right, and if I type in a 4 here, it'll return that 4. That was the last anything. You know, you think there's 4 cool last formulas, but there's lots of other situations. Look at this one right here. All right, so we can use our idea of looking up the last number, but here's the problem. Once we get to Joe, I need to know that it's this row of values. If I select Mo, it's this rows of values. Now this is going to jump ahead to a video, tomorrow's video, which is index and match. And one of the best tricks for index and match is that index and match can look up an entire row or an entire column. So let's go ahead and get a preview. Index. Index, you give it an array, and it can be a two-way array. And comma, the row number. Well, I need to, from this Mo, throw row 2 into the index. For that, you use the match function. Match tells you the relative position of an item in a list. So I'm going to look up that. Within here, comment, I'm going to do exact match. Now, the trick is that's the row number. Right now, it's incomplete because this range right here, this lookup array, is 2-dimensional. And so you have to give it 2 dimensions, a row and a column. But watch this. If you type a column and you either type a 0 or leave it blank, it says all the columns. And we'll look at a bunch of examples tomorrow for that. All right, so what it's doing is it's delivering now the whole row. Again, a formula delivering multiple items. Doesn't really work in a single cell, but if you hit the F9, you can see, sure enough, it's delivering that correct row. Control Z. And so now what do we want? We're simply going to use that as our one of our arrays in our lookup. We're going to say lookup. I'm looking up numbers. You don't have to use this big number, but if you do, you'll never have a problem. So plus 307, some big number. All right, so it's 200. If I change this to, and Mo's 200. If I change it to Joe, sure enough, it's Joe's. Mo, and then Sue is 700. All right, now what about one last lookup last? Sometimes you want to look up last with a criteria. So I want to be able to put any single date in here. And you can see the last trade made was C, and so I need to return that there. If it's the 21st, I need Whole Foods Market International. So we're going to build our lookup, comma, and our lookup vector. This is going to contain our criteria, or our date. In essence, this part has to find all of the dates in this column. So in parentheses, I'm going to say anytime that is equal to this. And so we'll get 2 trues there. Close parentheses. Trues and falses, I want them showing up as 1s and 0s. So I'm going to do that 1 divide by. And you can see that it will give us F9, a bunch of divide by zeros, and then the 1s. This is a sorted column because we're entering transactions in as they come up. So we want to get to that last one. Control Z, so we do our 2. Comma, and we have a result vector. And so that will do it. If I go ahead and have this on the 18th, it's XOM. If I have this on the 20th, it should give me XOM also. So last trade enter on a specific date. Wow, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different get last examples. Now we want to go over to the sheet lookup within a text string. We have 2 great examples here. Here we have some book titles, and we need to assign the proper code to that book. But here's the problem. We need to look up find out, ask the question, are any of these within the title? If so, then put the code there. We're going to use the search function to look within a text string for a subtext string. Equals search. Search, you usually give it like a text, like Microsoft, comma, within here, right? And it tells you the position. It would give us 1 because it's the first character. But we want to search for a bunch. So in the find text argument, we're going to highlight all those and hit the F4 key. Because we give it more than one item, right now you'll see it'll return an array because we're asking how many are any of these within there. If they were all in there, this would return the position that each one of these subtext strings start within this larger text string. Now I'm going to hit the F9 key. It just returns a 1 because it found only 1. Now our titles are not going to have both. If they do, then it wouldn't work. But in this case, we're assuming that that won't happen. Control Z. I'm just going to enter this. Control Shift Enter and drag it down. And so for this last one right here, if I hit F9, you can see VisiCalc is the second item in the list. So we have an array returned here. So that number will be the trigger saying, in this, it's the second one. And then we'll tell the lookup to get that. But notice search is telling the position that it's starting in the 22nd position. So what do we want to do? Well, look down here. There's the repeat function. 2 to the 15th is 1 more characters than are allowed in a cell. 2 to the 15 minus 1, you can see I've used the repeat function. You can see that it works. It doesn't work there. So I'm going to use the big number 2 to the 15th in our lookup. Because remember, this is the search is always going to return the position of text. So I'm going to use lookup and the lookup value, some big number. I'm going to find 2 caret 1 to the 5th. That's 1 more than the biggest, so that big number will work. It'll always find the position there. That's the lookup vector. This vector right here, if I hit F9, it's the trigger to tell us which row is over in our code we want to return. Control Z. So now we simply comma, and our result vector right there, F4. And we have an array returned here, but because lookup vector can handle it, we simply hit Control Enter and double click and send it down. All right, and so then if we have our NA, as we saw earlier in the video, we could use if or if error. All right, so we have a second example down here for looking something up within a text string. Here we want to find either top load or front load. Here there's a top load. Down here there's a front load. Here there's nothing. But once we find that, we want to then repeat it. So if it says top load anywhere within this text string, we want to say top load here. Front load anywhere within it, we want front load. We're going to use the search, and just like last time, we're going to put more than one item into the find text. But I'm going to hard code this in instead of having it in the cells using array syntax. So I do curly brackets, and in double quotes, I'm going to say top load, and double quote, comma. and then in double quotes front, and then end curly bracket. I'm going to say are either one of those items within here. Now this will return, there should be never both. It should be one or the other from our description. So it'll either return a number here or here. So we can go to lookup. And again, the most characters that are allowed in the cell are 2 caret 15 minus 1. So I'll leave that 2 caret 15. That's a sufficient big number. It'll either find one here or here. And the result vector, comma, result vector is going to be Control V. All right, and then VLOOKUP, lookup will handle that. I hit Enter, and then double click and send it down. And then again, you can do the same thing. If you want, you can put if, error, or if to list whatever you want there. Now, let's go over and look at one of my favorite examples for lookup. We actually saw this last video. We saw how when you have a variable rate table, whether it's for taxes or commissions or payroll tables, the formula gets pretty complicated. And we did a tax example last video where we did VLOOKUP. So here I want to shorten this long formula using lookup and do the commission example. So the idea here is we have sales, our rate, and you have to have a column with commissions from previous brackets. So really, if you make 55,000, you'd look this value up. So this is the row. You'd say 925 plus whatever excess is over, and there's our amount, minus the amount that we've already earned from the sales that have already earned us commissions from earlier brackets, and we'd multiply it times that rate. So when you look at this, you can see they're all on the same row. So this is going to be a lookup with this as the last column. This is going to be lookup with just simply one column. And this will be the third lookup within our formula with this as the last column. So you ready? Equals lookup. And in this case, we're using 3 lookups in one formula. So because we don't have to type in the third argument for column index, it should be a little bit shorter. All right, so I say look that up. Within this, that gives me my lookup. It's more rows, so it's doing vertical. We have the last column, so it's returning that. Plus whatever I have right here, minus, and I need all of the sales that have been had a calculation made upon them for commission. So I say lookup, and it's that one. And just a single column. So this is kind of strange. You're looking something up and returning it, right? But it's going to return that 50,000. So it'll give me 55,000 minus 50,000. All right, and so then I put another parentheses here and multiply it times a lookup. I'm looking up this, comma, and this is 2, since that's the last one. So I don't know, that's just a little bit shorter, and it's dynamic, of course, if you change this to 22,000. The manual one doesn't work, but lookup or a VLOOKUP does. Now we have 2 more examples. Let's go over to the sheet called Crazy Array. Now this is from finance. In finance, you analyze cash flows, and net present value and IRR are great means to analyze whether to accept a project or not. But people actually use payback, and payback just says if these are your cash flows, this is at time 0, this is how much you expend, and these are the cash coming in over the years. I did an expandable formula over here that's adding. Right now, year 0, we haven't recouped any. Here, since that's an expandable range, now it's adding those. So what it tells you is that between year 3 and 4, somewhere there we got to 0. That means we recouped our original cash. And the payback rule, we said, well, how many years did it take? I'm going to take that 3, and assuming that the cash is earned over equal time periods in the year, I'm going to take this, which is the amount of cash still to recoup left, divided by how much cash we brought in during the year. Now this is a negative, so I'm going to subtract it. A negative and a negative will add. Now that'll give me 3.47. But notice this pattern here. If we somehow could look something up in this column, the cumulative cash flow from payback, if we looked up the number 0, right, this column is sorted from smaller to bigger. If we looked up 0, it'd bump into the first number bigger and jump back here. That would establish that for our calculation, 1, 2, 3, 4, this is the 4th row. Now we'd have to deal with the fact that one of the cells in our calculations is one below, but no problem. Let's start with the idea of looking up 0 here. So I'm going to use equals lookup, look up that, comma, within this range right here. Let's just see what happens, because right now we know that if we looked up 0, it should return that minus 187, right? And it sure enough does. But now look, what we're using is we're using the array here, saying please return it from that column here. But now we want to switch up to here and add the result vector. Now remember, we've established this will no longer, once we add this result vector, it'll no longer return from here. It just establishes a position from that lookup vector. So what are we going to do here? We need 3. So we know that it'll be the 4th position. So boom, boom, or this plus this divided by this. So no problem. Let's just do that. The whole range. And we're going to end up just like we did in this cell here. There's a minus, so to add, we're going to minus. And we're going to take this whole range here. Now, so far, we're good, because the 4th position would be 3 minus this minus number here. But watch this. We're going to divide by, and I'm just going to trick it. I'm going to take one less row. That means in this dancing ants range right here, 1, 2, 3, 4. Since lookup knows to get the 4th one from this range, it's going to divide by that. 3 minus this minus divided by that. Now, it will give us an NA at the end. If I hit the F9 key, whoops, it delivers the number. If I do this one right here, this is the result vector. So these are the things that are going to be returned back to the cell. It does give us an NA at the end, but no problem. When I hit Enter, that will return it. Now, two things. One is we've seen, so far in this video, we've seen how to put an array here. We've seen how to put an array here. And now we've also seen how we can have an array there. And we simply hit Enter. Now, for lookup vector and result vector, both of those don't require Ctrl Shift Enter. But because the first couple examples we had when we had an array here, that means it's returning multiple items, and we need to do something with that. Now, we do need to further amend this, and I'm in another video in my finance class. I do that because if the cash flows are never met, then we have to add an if in here that says we're never going to meet it. But there we go. If I change this 10, so this is all 10, then the payback period here is going to be between 6 and 7. All right, one last example for amazing lookup function, and it is conditional formatting. Now, I want to conditional format based on the income. I want to conditionally format the whole row. So what this means is I need to do something like this. Let me see if I can make this. When you do conditional formatting, you highlight the range, and in the active cell, you build a true-false logical formula that in memory is copying down and over. So I'm going to build it in these cells just so we can see the established true falses, and then we'll do it, paste in the conditional formatting dialog box. So here I'm going to say equals is this row header, and I'm going to lock it with the F4 key 3 times because I want the formula to always look at the row header there. But when it moves down, it moves to the next row header. Anytime that is equal to lookup. And what am I looking up? Boom. That locked in all directions. Whoops, I hit the F5 instead of F4, locked in all directions. Comma. And the lookup vector is going to be, or the array is going to be because it's going to return that value locked in all directions. Now, right now, you can see if it's looking up this, it races down, bumps into the first value bigger, jumps back here. So it's going to return 1,000. And when this formula gets down to the 1,000 row, it'll say 1,000 equals 1,000. And it will give us a true. Now, I'm going to populate all of these highlighted cells with Ctrl Enter. All the rest are false there. So there you can see that's our established patterns of trues and falses for conditional formatting. Copy the formula up in the uppermost left cell. Highlight it, and the uppermost cell is the active cell. Alt-O-D. Alt-O-D. New rule. Formula. Control-V. That's my logical true-false format, and I can format it however I want. And so now, whatever I change this to, 5,000, that'll better give me the last one. 99, that'll better give me the first one. 102, that'll give me the second one. All right, so that was a lot about the lookup function. VLOOKUP week video number 2, but it was all about not VLOOKUP, but lookup. All right, see you next video.